Karoline Leavitt stood in the first-class line, dressed simply a stark contrast to the luxury around her. A man watched her with disdain, unable to hide his arrogance. What happened next would leave everyone on that plane completely speechless and forever change one life. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another special story for you. Okay, let's get started with the encounter in the first-class line. Los Angeles International Airport was a maelstrom of movement, a never-ending current of travelers rushing in every direction. The steady hum of conversations, the drone of overhead flight announcements, and the rhythmic clatter of luggage wheels filled the air. In the middle of it all stood Karoline Leavitt. She was calm, collected, a quiet strength among the chaos. She didn't need the sharp cut of a tailored power suit or the flash of designer accessories to command attention. Instead, she exuded a confidence that came from something deeper, something unshakable. She adjusted the carry-on bag at her side, the soft golden glow of the cross around her neck catching the airport lights as she stepped into the first-class boarding line. The ticketing agent barely glanced at her as she scanned the pass and waved her through. But just behind her, a different presence entered the line, one far more conspicuous. A man in an impeccably tailored navy suit, a Rolex glinting from his sleeve, and an air of entitlement so thick you could cut it. Ethan Bradley, a hedge fund executive, the kind of man who had long forgotten what it was like to struggle, the kind who believed wealth didn't just open doors, it closed them behind people like him, ensuring exclusivity. And when his gaze landed on Karoline, something in his expression shifted. Mild surprise followed by immediate judgment. He scanned her simple outfit, professional yet understated, not the usual designer ensembles he was used to seeing in first class. He smirked. "First class, huh?" His voice carried an easy arrogance, the kind of tone that dripped with the assumption that this must be a mistake. Karoline turned slightly, her expression neutral but unreadable. "The world is full of surprises," she replied, her tone steady. Ethan chuckled softly. "Guess so. Just not what I expected. You don't really seem like the usual type who flies up here." Karoline didn't take the bait. She had stood behind podiums, faced relentless questioning from the press, handled aggressive political opponents on live television. A few words from a self-important businessman weren't enough to rattle her. Without responding, she stepped forward, walking calmly toward the jet bridge. But Ethan Bradley wasn't done yet. The first-class cabin was everything Ethan expected. Spacious seats, polished wood panels, champagne flutes waiting in crystal-clear holders. Karoline stowed her bag in the overhead compartment and settled into her window seat, exhaling softly as she glanced out at the runway, stretching into the distance. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to appreciate the quiet before the flight. And then, a familiar voice shattered it. "No way!" She turned to find Ethan standing in the aisle, his boarding pass in hand. For a second, he simply stared at the empty seat beside her, then down at his ticket, then back at her again. Disbelief flickered across his face. This has to be a joke. With a low, incredulous chuckle, he dropped into the seat next to her, shaking his head as if the universe itself had played some cruel trick on him. "Well, this is ironic," he muttered, adjusting his cuffs. "Guess we're travel buddies now." Karoline didn't even blink. "Looks like it." Ethan leaned back, glancing around the cabin filled with executives, dignitaries, and high-profile travelers. His gaze flickered to the flight attendants pouring champagne before settling on Karoline once more. And then his eyes caught something else, the golden cross resting just below her collarbone. For the first time, his confidence wavered. Something about it made him hesitate. Then, as if needing to re-establish control of the conversation, he leaned in slightly. "So, what do you do?" His tone was casual, but there was a subtle sharpness to it, as if he was trying to put her in a box. Karoline met his gaze, calm and unwavering. "I work in politics." Ethan's eyebrows raised slightly. "Ah, a consultant?" "Not exactly." He smirked. "PR, then? Spin doctor for some senator?" "Not that either," she said evenly. Ethan let out a soft chuckle, as if he was enjoying the guessing game. "Let me guess. Fundraising? Campaign events?" Finally, Karoline turned fully to face him. I was the youngest White House press secretary in history. Silence. Ethan's smirk faltered. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. For the first time since she met him, he looked truly speechless. Then, he laughed. But it wasn't the smug, self-assured laugh from earlier. It was a stunned chuckle, the sound of a man realizing he had completely misjudged the person sitting next to him. Wait, you're Karoline Leavitt. She nodded. Ethan exhaled sharply, leaning back in his seat. Well, didn't see that coming. The arrogance that had been so firmly in place at the start of the conversation. It was gone now. For a man who prided himself on knowing everything, he had just learned an unexpected lesson, one that left him sitting in the stunned silence. But Karoline wasn't the type to gloat, so she simply turned back toward the window, letting him sit with his thoughts. And then, the flight took off. The assumptions we make about people, based on what they wear, how they carry themselves, or where we think they belong, often say more about us than them. Ethan Bradley had started this flight thinking status to find a person, but before the journey was even halfway through, he was beginning to realize he might have been wrong. The plane had settled at cruising altitude, floating above the clouds like a silent giant. Outside, the sun painted streaks of gold over an endless horizon. Inside first class, the air was thick with something unspoken. Flight attendants moved gracefully down the aisle, offering drinks with well-rehearsed smiles. The clinking of ice against crystal glasses and the soft murmur of conversation filled the cabin. Ethan Bradley, who had spent the past hour grappling with his own misjudgment, lifted a hand, regaining a sliver of his usual confidence. "Champagne," he ordered. Then with a smirk, he added, "Make it two." The attendant nodded and turned to Karoline. "And for you, ma'am." She smiled, steady, unwavering. "Just water, please." Ethan turned his head, smirk curling back into place. He saw an opening, a chance to reassert himself. "Water? Come on. You're in first class. At least go for a cocktail. It's not like you're paying for it." Karoline didn't waver. She simply glanced at the gold cross resting against her blouse, running her thumb lightly over it. "I'm just fine with this." Ethan scoffed, swirling the air with his fingers, as if trying to grasp at an argument. "See, that's what I don't get about people like you," he said, turning toward her with renewed arrogance. "You talk about humility, yet here you are, sitting in first class. Isn't that a contradiction?" This time Karoline turned fully to face him, and when she spoke, her voice was calm, but edged with quiet strength. "No contradiction at all. I worked hard for this seat, just like you did. But the difference is, I don't need to prove it to anyone." The words hit like a shockwave. The smirk on Ethan's face flickered, and then disappeared altogether. For the first time, he had no response. The flight attendant returned, setting a glass of champagne in front of him with the soft clink of fine crystal. But suddenly, it didn't seem as satisfying. The bubbles fizzed silently, mirroring the quiet turbulence inside his own head. The flight continued, but Ethan was different now. His shoulders weren't squared in prideful confidence anymore. His signature smirk, the one that had seemed permanently etched into his face, was nowhere to be found. Instead, he sat quietly, staring at the golden liquid in his glass, rolling it between his fingers. For the first time in a long time, he was thinking. The hum of the engines, the soft overhead lighting, the gentle sway of the aircraft. It all felt distant compared to the weight of his own thoughts. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he exhaled, a long, slow sigh. "You know," he began, his voice lower now, no arrogance, no superiority, just something softer. Karoline turned, raising an eyebrow. "I misjudged you." He didn't even try to dress it up in sarcasm this time. He just stated it plainly, honestly, as if admitting it out loud made it real. He turned the glass in his hand, watching the liquid swirl. "I assumed things about you before I even knew who you were," he admitted. There was no bravado in his tone, just recognition. "It's funny how we think we know people just by looking at them." Karoline offered a small, knowing smile. "It happens." Ethan let out a breath, half a laugh, half something else, something almost like regret. "It shouldn't," he said quietly. For the first time, his voice lacked arrogance. Instead, there was humility. The seatbelt sign illuminated overhead. The flight was preparing for descent. Ethan turned to Karoline one last time. "You ever wonder why people are so quick to judge?" She didn't even have to think about it. "Because it's easier than understanding." The words landed like a revelation. Ethan nodded slowly, and this time he had nothing left to say. The plane touched down, rolling smoothly toward the gate. The world outside bustled on as if nothing had changed. But inside Ethan Bradley, everything had. He had boarded this flight thinking status defined a person. But by the time the wheels hit the tarmac, he realized character was worth infinitely more. And for the first time in a long time, he wanted to be better. In a world obsessed with appearances, humility is the rarest currency. And those who carry it, they leave a mark far deeper than wealth ever could. And the story ends here, as well as the end of Ethan's long-standing arrogance. And it is also the nod to honor the beauty of Mrs. Karoline Leavitt's dignity. If this story moved you, share it, because sometimes the most unexpected encounters teach us the greatest lessons.